Welcome to another episode of Adventures Through the Mind podcast. I am your host, James W. Gesso. I want to start out this episode really quick with an apology for its late release. Although the episodes tend to release every 2 weeks, I am a singular person doing this to the best of my ability, and I thought I could pull off every 2 weeks while still on tour, but an extensive travel schedule, transit schedule, plus 1 week at Shambhala, plus several days of healing from Shambhala, and I missed the date. So sorry about this late release. Please forgive me. I will do my best as it continues to get better and better over time. With that out of the way, I am happy to bring you this new episode with Giorgia Gaia. She is a cultural anthropologist whom I met at Ozora Festival back in 2016 when I was brought out there to teach as a part of their conference. Her and I got to chatting, and I learned a lot about how awesome she is. And one of the things that she was awesome for was actually because she wrote her dissertation when she got her degree in Western Esotericism at the University in Amsterdam. She wrote it on Changa, actually, which is a DMT smoking blend that you're going to hear all about in the interview, and is one that that I have found to be incredibly, meaningful, a very meaningful and interesting experience, qualitatively different than freebase and crystal DMT. Now, if this is all a little over the head for some of the listeners, don't worry. As we get into the interview here with Giorgia, it will all become clear and be broken down step by step, slowly. So if you don't already know, you will know, and those of you who already know will get to know a whole lot more. Another interesting thing about Changa is that it is often attributed to having been sort of invented, or at least popularized and named by Julian Palmer, who is a former guest on the show, episode 19, which was called Articulations on the Meaning and Utilization of Psychedelics. I think that's what it's called, but episode number 19 with Julian Palmer. So you can check out that episode after this one if you're feeling sparked as to, whoa, Changa's crazy. What's up with this guy who apparently, at least popularized it and named it, if not invented it? But before we jump into this episode with Giorgia, I would like to send a few thanks. The first thanks is to Eclectic Nightmare from the USA, who left a 5-star review on iTunes saying, "Plenty of very diverse and interesting shows. Great guests with very insightful words. Keep up the great work. Thanks, Eclectic Nightmare. I will." And one of the things that helps me keep up the great work is with the direct financial support of people, including Stasia from Victoria, who just offered a significant one-time donation. Thank you very much, Stasia. And also to my patrons on Patreon. The largest of those patrons, the largest contributors of those patrons, include Jason, Melanie, Thomas, Wes, and Greg. Thank you very much, and thank you to the other patrons as well. Even the smaller contributions are incredibly meaningful as this podcast grows, and not only as the podcast grows, but as my commitment to this path grows as well. In the fall, I'm going to have some interesting and exciting news for you guys and some changes which I think are going to positively impact not only the show, but all of my written work as well. Which is the final little thing that I would like to say before we get into this episode, which is that I've been playing around with basically travel blogging on Instagram, doing more than just posting, "Hey, I'm over here, look how awesome it is," or "Hey, here's a picture of me doing a thing," which I still do because it is Instagram after all. It's a fantastic ego trip. But by taking the opportunity to get some of these little ideas out, I guess big ideas but little written pieces, to share my journey and share my insights on certain things, and the I guess the more significant ones get released as blogs over on jameswgesso.com. One of the more recent ones that got released as a blog was called Silence and Wonder, which you can check out over at jameswgesso.com, or you could just check me out at jameswgesso on Instagram, follow my progress, follow the things that I am doing there. It's definitely at this point my favorite medium for blogging and sharing what I'm up to in the world, and also for engaging with people, because it's we have been conditioned over a very long time to prioritize the visual sense as the primary one. So engaging with people's lives through this visual construction is pretty nice. As although to be honest, a lot of the times I get the sense that not only just myself, but a lot of people are probably tailoring their posts to lean towards a happier life than they're actually living. At least we're engaging each other to some degree anyways, right? So check me out on Instagram at JamesWJesso. A quick recap. Sorry about the late release. I will get better and better over time. Thank you for the podcast reviews on iTunes. If you send one in, I will read it on the show. Thank you for the economic support, either via PayPal or via Patreon, both of which you can learn about via jameswjesso.com/support. And thank you for following me on Instagram, where I've been travel blogging. And you can check out Silence and Wonder on my website, jameswjesso.com, on the main page. That's it. Thank you so much, and enjoy this episode with Giorgia Gaia, all about Changa. Giorgia Gaia is an independent researcher with a master's degree in Cultural and Social Anthropology and another master's degree in Theology, specifically Western Esotericism, at the University Van Amsterdam. Since her early 20s, she has been working as an electronic musician and event organizer, also in international festivals. Her academic researches have focused on musical subcultures and psychedelics, esoteric communities, ecology, and alterations of consciousness broadly. She spent about 4 years doing fieldwork in the psychedelic trance scenes around Europe and in a few esoteric communities, as for instance Damanhur in North Italy, publishing the results of her research in underground platforms and obtaining positive responses. Recently, she has completed a consistent historical and anthropological research on Changa, a new concoction containing DMT. Welcome, Giorgia.
Thank you, James.
So I think it would be good to start with the scope of your research around Changa. What question did you go in seeking to investigate, and how did you go about that?
Okay, so the whole story for me with Changa started when my experiences in psychedelic trance parties became more consistent, and at that point, I was attracted by this common use of people to just go around smoking this compound. And I started speaking with them during the events and during my personal engagement with these people. And what surprised me the most was the fact that actually these experiences were so transformative for them, in a way even more than taking just LSD or mushrooms. Like in a way that opened up some sort of gates that are unique to DMT, and in this case Changa, which is we'll say later what is. But so the question that I drove my research was trying to understand how the experience is transforming the consciousness of the user of the compound. So mostly I was trying to get into their own experiences. What at the first sight was looking like very interesting to me was not just the use of Changa, but in the context of Psytrance party, the use of different compounds at the same moment, different substances. And one that worked very well for most of them was the using together of these three chai, charas, and Changa, which is not related with my research on Changa only, but it's the beginning where everything started, because I was very attracted by seeing these people sitting in circles and passing this big pipe to smoke ash, and to see that afterwards they were even smoking Changa, and they were drinking this tea. So that the whole interest started there, and so then observing and participating in this sort of rituals, I decided to go deeper and just study Changa as a whole phenomenon.
Mm-hmm. And so the your essay, of course, I didn't write down the name of your like master's thesis on Changa. It was called Transformations in Changa
Yeah.
Culture. So you didn't just research Changa, though you did obviously a lot of extensive research as reading it really exposes. But you interviewed several Changa users and had a very specific way of sort of analyzing and gathering what became the data for your thesis. Can you talk about how many people you interviewed and what your intentions were and sort of the structure of your research?
Yeah, sure. So this is an anthropological interpretation. So I tried to gather as much interviews was possible for me, and so I interviewed about 40, between 40 to 50 users. And I also tried to get in touch with the people which are sort of at the edge of the Changa culture. So experts in the field, one was David Nichols, which is the editor also of the DMT Nexus website, and Julian Palmer, who is the man who claims to have invented Changa, and another anonymous one, which he doesn't want to reveal his name, but is active on the web under the pseudonym of Professor 8. So, and it's quite old and experienced guy who was using Changa already before the moment that this was called Changa in a therapeutic setting. So what I did was I did first extensive interviews with these three guys, experts guys, and just talking about the phenomenon, not only about the experience itself. So how did it born? How do I interpret the phenomenon itself? Because of course, one can say that okay, Changa is just DMT, so it's just a way to smoke DMT. But actually, it became something more. Like it became really a whole cultural phenomenon. It's not just the best way to smoke DMT because it's the most practical, the most easy, but it's also a whole cultural phenomenon. So the name sounds so also familiar to the people that it could just, it's not possible to avoid like going into creating a framework for this phenomenon, especially in some scenes where there are a lot of psychedelic users. So that was mostly the beginning. Then I started doing interviews with all the users, normal users, from all over the world. So some were taken. Some people I just asked them to be interviewed during festivals. Some other people were interviewed on Skype, so online interviews, and some others through written questionnaires, because they were just didn't want to talk about it because they said I'm not gonna be able to express it, so I really need to focus and sit down and write it myself, because I need to narrativize my experience. I can't just speak about that because it's too complicated. Mm-hmm. And so then I adopted these different kinds of ways to get in touch with the people, and so then I, of course, analyzed the all answers, and it was quite a long trip into others people perspectives. It was very interesting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I really appreciated the focus on allowing people to, like you said, narrativize their experience and just come to come to a place where they feel like that's the best representation of what they went through and how it affected their views on the world, and then sort of looking into where the commonalities and themes are within that. I feel like I think that's a really important way for us to track and understand the evolution of culture, especially at cultures that emerge around things that are fairly new, such as Changa. But and some of the insights that you came from reading this very academic essay felt like reading like memoirs of positive supernatural transformations in a way that became very applicable into my own life because of this this foundation of narrative. But before we get into some of those observations, maybe since we've already kind of gone off a little bit, you can give us a rundown on exactly what is Changa.
Yeah, sure. So Changa is a mixture of extracted DMT and smokable herbs and monoamide oxidase inhibitors. So for monoamine oxidase inhibitors, mostly I used Banisteriopsis capi, which is the vine of the ayahuasca, or Peganum armala, Syrian rue, and all these other kinds of inhibitors. And there are different recipes. There is no unique recipe for doing Changa. The only, let's say, the most important thing is that there is a presence of DMT and MAO inhibitors. So that's just the only rule. Also, the inhibitors could be in just a plant form or extracted form, which I honestly prefer, because it's as like the human body needs an enormous amount to perceive them. If you put just the plant matter, then it's not you're not gonna feel the difference that much. But also agreeing with Nichols from the DMT Nexus, I will suggest that Changa needs extracted forms of inhibitors. But beside of this, Changa is, like, as I said, is a mixture of herbs, DMT, and inhibitors, and it's foremost also a cultural phenomenon, as we already said before. So in a way, it's nothing so unique to mix these three things together, because of course going around with crystal DMT is not so handy, and it's not so easy to transport, either for security reasons but also for technical reasons. It's a lot more vulnerable substance. So if you have just a bag with with leaves, it's easier. You can smoke it everywhere. So it's for sure the easiest, handiest way, but also it was a way that was already used by psychonauts for some time. And when Julian Palmer found this name and started promoting it, he sort of created a whole phenomenon by just proposing it around the world and proposing the most suitable by now underground name to use to refer to a way of smoking DMT, which is for sure, in my opinion, the most interesting one. Beside of that, of course, there is a little bit of difference in the effects itself. So Changa is not like DMT. Changa lasts a little bit longer, and it's the whole trip is a lot more grounded, and it's all easier to navigate into it. And also the difference is made by the source of the DMT. So this is more for an expert psychonaut to just, let's say, consider whether they prefer a blend made with acacia, or a blend made with mimosa, or a blend made with other plants containing DMT, which are now already about 200 discovered, and there will be more for sure. But mostly Changa is made by is made with DMT sourced by acacia in Australia and mimosa in the rest of the world. So there are two kind of different, a little bit different experiences also because of the alkaloids contained in the plants, and also in a more, let's say, spiritual way because of the spirits of the plants that are involved in the game. So that's a bit the story.
Mm-hmm. So, I mean, Changa then is a name for a DMT smoking technology that combines monoamine oxidase inhibitors with extracted DMT infused into some sort of plant substrate, such as various flowers, mullein, etc. I've heard it called the evolution of ayahuasca or smokable ayahuasca. Do you feel like that is an accurate description of Changa, or if not, why?
Well, it is an accurate description in a way that if you look at the thing itself, it contains the same active molecules that are contained in the ayahuasca, but you can't really say that it is just like not even similar to the ayahuasca. So I don't think I would not use this way of addressing to Changa because it's a whole different cultural context, and so it could be misleading to say that it's an evolution of ayahuasca. I would not really say it. I would say it's an evolution of how to smoke DMT itself, not the ayahuasca. It's not involved, except for the ingredients, but it's just a technical thing for maybe people understand something, but it's a bit misleading in my opinion, so I wouldn't use it.
Mm-hmm. And qualitatively, smoking Changa isn't like drinking ayahuasca, and it isn't like smoking DMT. It's like its own unique, interesting thing. Of course, the nuances of one's experience are obviously, like you said, modulated by what plant sources are being used, be it acacia, acacia, or mimosa, and how extracted the MAOIs are, or if it's just Syrian rue, or if it's just the shavings of capivine, etc.
Yeah.
But there are some emerging commonalities that come out that seem to be very distinctly similar to some of the commonalities that are discussed in the ayahuasca experience, such as Changa being a profound healer in some way or another, and that it having this profoundly transformational potential, which is also, of course, given to DMT and many other psychedelics. And I'm curious about transformation being such a profound aspect of your research. When you were looking to explore and unpack these transformational potentials of Changa, what exactly were you looking for in the person? Like, what does it mean for something to be transformational?
Yeah, well, let's say for me, what I was looking for in the people was to really understand their interpretation or to get their interpretation of this phenomenological trip into their own perceptions of reality and the perceptions of themselves, of other realms of reality, of time and space, of gods and divinity in general, of death, and whatever kind of major topic is part of our archetypical way of thinking at life. No, so going through this, I realized that which I confirmed my idea that reality is not just one, and that reality and the other realities, whatever you like perceive is just impossible to be said in a unique perspective. So I understood that I really had to just step back and just not judge or not trying to being involved in the narrations as less as possible. That's why I also reported the majority of the interviews, like not the parts of the interviews, are taken exactly from my spoken word with them. So the thing they said to me is not just an interpretation I gave of that, but it's what they said, because it's very important for someone that wants to understand psychedelic experiences and especially DMT experiences as transformative moments to get into the point that there is no rule. So everything can really happen. You can't expect that things go in a way and in another way, and it's very difficult to categorize these things. I've tried to create order out of experience, which is one of the things that anthropologists just generally do. But if you read the essay, you see that like it's still chaotic, because psychedelic experiences are chaotic in their in their steps, in their movements, and although they are chaotic, they can make things even more simple at the end of the day. So it's, of course, always a psychedelic experience like DMT, Changa, is paradoxical for some reasons, because you just have that moment in which you completely break through what are your views on reality, and so you get into this other world, which can be super nice, full of colors, or super creepy, or whatever it is. It's chaotic for you, for your mind, perception, soul, body, whatever. It's a chaos. But what happens is that after that, majority of the people just find peace. So it's like this passage, it's a rite of passage from a state of ordinary and rational conception of what you have and what you do, to a completely renewed one. So it's a big thing to speak about and to write about. It's huge effort to capture all these kind of personal underlines of what's happening.
Mm-hmm. Part of somewhere inside of your essay there, you talk about how, like you said, that the Changa experience and a lot of psychedelic experiences, but specifically we'll say Changa, is, and I'm going to use my own language here, paraphrasing, but it's very disruptive to one's sense of reality and sense of like what they thought was real, and it is very can bring you into extremely unexpected places. Like you said, sometimes it can be really beautiful, and other times it can be really uncomfortable or frightening, and other times it can be just beyond either of those descriptions in a way that doesn't really make any logical sense at all. And that in the essay you talk about the value of narrativizing these types of experiences. And I'm curious what you feel about and maybe discussing the importance of going back and looking at our experiences on psychedelics and finding a way to language them. Like, is there a value there? Is it better if we don't share these stories, or is it better that we do share them? I know I'm creating maybe a bit of a false dichotomy here, but just your thoughts on crafting story out of our experiences and the importance and the possible value there.
Yeah. So I think it's very important, and necessary to narrativize psychedelic experiences, because I believe that narratives actually create what is a shared consensus reality. Well, you can be very radical in it, but also just generally. So if the narratives concerning Changa speak about and report examples of people that have, as we said, like maybe chaotic experiences or enlightening experiences, or experiences that brought them to increase their awareness. So then it's sort of this morphogenetic field around Changa becomes connected with this sort of narratives, and this could be just a patterns that repeats for all the other people that are, of course, all connected by some sort of energies. And so it's beside of being an interesting thing on an academic level, because of course, you can't really do psychedelic research in an anthropological field trying to be objective, or trying to analyze or quantize the experiences. You can just make like as much as you can, like make a nice story out of it. And so while making this, using narratives is the only way you can work with such subjective experiences. So I think yes, like creating narrative is the most interesting game I've been witnessing recently, also in other kind of research. So people are really engaged. People I interview, they're like happy of having the possibility to say really what they need to say, and it becomes also an interaction between the researcher and the person that is interviewed, in a way that while they are interviewed, they also understand the experience better. So it's also a step forward in healing and in evolving their perspectives. So in a way, you become a sort of helper, more than other than a researcher. You step into their life, and you really engage in a dialect with them, in an everyday relationship in some cases. When they have new discoveries about this other world that is there, when this is accessible with Changa, they can't wait to call you and they can tell you what's going on and help you out, because it's like creating narrative is also a collective and shared experience. So it's a dialect, and it's in my opinion either good for persons to work with that and to narrativize their experience, so making order out of them, and for the researcher also to write them down, because that will be for sure useful for other people that have the same or similar stories, to just get into what phenomenologically happened to another person, even before or after a positive or negative experience. So in any case, it's something that's going to be helpful and also somehow entertaining.
Yeah. There's several things that came up that what you just said really inspired me. One of which is the value of importance of listening in community, and offering people space to tell their stories and to really participate in those stories, and to be supportive and help teasing out the nuances of the narrative as it's being told, which is obviously quite helpful to the person, but can be really helpful to the person listening as well, because from what I understand, sort of our daily experience of reality is an unconscious or subconscious narrative that's constantly being sown through all of our experiences, and that we don't find ourselves in awe or in confusion or in bewilderment when we're not experiencing things that can't be rationally sewn into the narrative. And when we have experiences that can't be sewn into narrative because they're too overwhelming or they're too intense, then we continue to have memory of these experiences, but if we don't have the language for them and say there's something painful, then they can emerge as something that can be quite traumatic, where being able to go back to a painful experience that became trauma, make language out of it, tell the story without getting uncomfortable is extremely healing. It's a good marker for a healing process. And I think the same can be said for positive experiences. If they can't be shared in some way, then there's a risk of them being lost. And if they're really beautiful and they get lost, I think the loss of something beautiful in a person's life can be very traumatic for them as well.
Yeah.
And
totally.
Any experience that absolutely and almost like undeniably disrupts the normal narrative of what is the basic ontological foundation for what is real as we walk through our lives is going to introduce an opportunity for transformation, either positive or negative, because it could very well be negative. And I want to talk to you about safety and cautions and stuff later on. But oftentimes when held in the right space, it is very positive. And there was three things that you saw Changa was doing that created this positive transformation. What were those three things that you saw Changa offering people?
Well, what do you mean exactly? Why just three?
Well, you had three specific things. One of them was the reenchantment of reality.
Yeah. These are all categories that I sort of created or tried to make sense of the old narratives. So one thing that was often happening to people was like what they say mostly is that they, especially if they come from a very skeptic point of view, if they are like let's say just people that never asked themselves if there is something out there which we can't perceive with our five senses. If these people just happen that once by chance they smoke Changa and they get into that world, when they come back, their vision, their perception of reality is totally different. They have to reconsider what is real, what is not real. They have to reconsider the dimension of divinity in general. And so, for instance, it happened to some of the interviewees that they saw like God's figures that they didn't know. Like for instance, a guy told me. He saw during this experience this blue goddess with multiple arms that was making weird faces, and it was a part of the fact that he felt that this was completely real, so more real than reality itself, which is a common theme recurring over and over again. But he didn't know what this goddess was, who this goddess was, and he was not at all a person involved in spirituality. After that experience, its patterns completely changed, and he discovered by chance that God was the goddess Kali, and since then he became very passionate about what all is about believing in something that we can't perceive with our senses. This is just one thing that can happen. So re-enchant reality, also like seeing nature in a more living, more as a living creature, and not just as something that is there and that doesn't move and is not alive. So you go back to some sort of animistic kind of view on reality. So where everything has a soul, even not animated things, everything can have a soul. And that's something that always often happens when you smoke DMT, and it is also connected with the ayahuasca world. It's not a case that like tribes that use ayahuasca for ages, they all have animistic beliefs. So they really believe that in everything there is a spirit. There is a metaphysical connection in every part of our lives, not just animated life, but also objects. And another thing that often happens, like another theme, which is very often reported by the people I've interviewed. There's this moment of which I call psychedelic gnosis, which it's this very deep inner knowledge of reality in general, and it's different than just re-enchanting reality, because you go a step forward here in a way, and you really get to know the dimensions of your mind. So as we know, like psychedelic means manifestation of the mind, and gnosis means knowledge. So the knowledge of all the manifestations of the mind, which is something that for every person is different, and it's very often so personal. Like, as we know, all the Gnosis church, they preach this the fact that believing in something means just like getting into it and so deeply that you can't even explain. There are no words to explain it to other people. So that's a very common theme in people that have experienced DMT and Changa. They say, "Oh, really, I can't describe what happened, but it completely changed like my perspective on reality, on myself, on my mind, on whatever it exists. It really, but it's unverifiable what they're saying, of course, because it's just so subjective, the most subjective experience you can imagine, and very often is unspeakable. So it's just a matter of feeling and getting into how really these people have changed. So it's very strong, and it's very strong to get in touch with these narratives, and also there are several other themes that come up over and over again, but I would like to focus mostly on another theme that is connected with the let's say perception of time, so also of life and death. So it's like it's completely disruptive in this way, because you understand that time, as we perceive but people understand and narrate how time becomes not like perceived so linear as we are used to perceive it. And in this way, also death, which is often experienced during a DMT session, like the psychedelic death and rebirth, is often an experience. Also, that becomes not just the end of the line of the time, but just another start. So, you like. I realized how actually most of the people, while experiencing a strong fear, they just understood lots of things and have lost this fear. So they had relieved from, they had strong healing from anxiety problems, depression, all sort of things happened. But while you experience this moment, you can't really get out from just facing your inner self and the inner core of what reality is. And the fact that it lasts just 10 minutes is it's really unbelievable, because the time you need then to elaborate this experience and to narrativize it, it's like far longer than that. And if you don't do that, you risk like just to get lost in the web of meanings. And of course, like there is this point of just focusing on psychedelics as a way to heal and get rid of our very narrow view of reality. And I think DMT is the tool that was prepared for us in this moment of evolution. So that's it.
There's definitely there's something to be said about how the sort of the common Western narrative, which is fairly deeply rooted in a physicalistic paradigm, to say that everything is just, like you said, it's just some inanimate moving parts, and that we are constructed of physical matter, and just, you know, we're an accidental epiphenomenon of causal forces, and that there isn't really any meaning to that at all. And that this foundation tends to push us, depending on where we live, into like some pretty interesting lives that are interesting only in the sense of how bereft they are of true meaning and value, where we become forced into these often consumeristic modes of living, focusing on work and acquisition of product, and ultimately our reality to be defined wherein on the inside we're like, oh, this is just the standard course of life, but from a certain perspective on the outside, it kind of looks like humans being factory farmed for the extraction and destruction of the planet, due to a fact that no one seems to believe that there's value in preserving its life, that the value is actually in extracting it to make more product and money. So this is, I kind of put my own little spin on it there, but this physicalistic narrative and some of the negative consequences that it has on culture and the way that we behave and our sense of value is fairly dramatically disrupted when one smokes Changa. As you said, it really can, it really flies in the face of the normal, of the standard operating narrative of the Western mind, of the skeptical, disillusioned, post-Renaissance physicalistic narrative, and calls people to question something else. You write in your essay, "The unreality the subject faces induces so many doubts and questions that any rational and inquisitive mind would feel the need to journey further in order to understand, or eventually surrender themselves to the inexplicability of the Changa phenomenon. Processing the content of my personal experiences and struggling to accept them without any scientific explanation, Changa became my antidote against skepticism and disenchantment." Can you talk about that a little bit, about your own experiences and what it's done for you on a personal level?
Sure. So, well, it completely changed my life in a way that, let's say, I was not new to psychedelic experiences at all, because I already had, I'm already very much thankful to psilocybin to have opened my mind and mind perception so much, like years ago. But being a researcher also puts you in a condition in which you're forced of trying to just narrow your narrow your perspective, especially if you are in academic world, which now I left. But like you have to narrow it as much as possible to make evidence out of everything. And speaking about this kind of experiences, you can't do this. You can't really narrow it, and you have to expand as much as possible your view. And for my personal experience, this was a sort of magic that really happened. In fact, I really believe, as McKenna said, that DMT is not a drug; it's just a real magic. But it was just everything synchronically fitting, and that point in which I was doing my fieldwork for another research on this famous esoteric community in Italy, where they do sort of really practice magic on a daily basis. They say they have contact with aliens. That they say they do time travels, and these things. So in that period in which I was doing research there, I was also engaging in some experiences with Changa myself, not there, not involved with the community at all, because it has nothing to do with them, but it was just outside of there in my own personal experience during that time of the fieldwork. And myself was, well, my rationality was in that period facing already these issues with the community, because I could not completely believe that what they were saying was true. I could not completely get rid of my skepticism. I could not just accept that these things were possible. And well, at the same time, smoking DMT and realizing that actually I also could have an ongoing relationship with an extraterrestrial being, entity, and that I could even talk to this entity, and that also actually when I was smoking DMT, Changa, in the nature, I really had strong connection with the trees, and I really could sort of see that they were alive, that they had a spirit that was very much matching with what I was living there, so that people were just doing concerts of the plants, so like putting some sensors on the plants, and the plants were playing music. And so that this all things sort of matched together, and from this period of strong confusion and strong confusion concerning my let's say my what I define reality, it came out that reality is not possible to be defined, and that it's just a narrative. It's just what you make out of your intuitions, and that reality is just so huge that we can't imagine, and that I should sort of stop being so close to it and start really re-enchant my everyday life. And in fact, this all sort of changed even my life as a whole. So I just got into being more a practitioner and not just someone that observe. And I started going very much more with the energies, and feeling much more the spirits of the whole things I'm engaging with. So just I got into more what is an ancestral kind of knowledge, which is the knowledge of the Native Americans, or the knowledge of these shamanic tribes. There is not just one word. They say three. Some of them say three or more words that you just, if you open up to them, you just can really have a lot of insights, and you really got into you get a medicine against what the society is trying to do to the people, just make all the people consumers and blinded and guided by very low level of consciousness. So it's a medicine for sure. It has been for me. It has been for a lot of people. It has been already for ages. DMT used as a medicine. So just I think we should be grateful to have the opportunity to have Changa nowadays. And as I think that made me laugh a lot. One of the people I interviewed, he said that everyone should smoke Changa, and especially Donald Trump should smoke Changa nowadays. But that was just fun for me to imagine if Trump would actually smoke Changa, what the world would be, for example. Or like how the perception of everyone would change, like to have some sort of global awakening using this kind of medicines, which is sort of happening undergroundly. But what if really this happens to a lot of more people? I guess that's something we can start to feel about and dream about.
Mm-hmm. There's definitely I get the feeling that in our society we have a strong logical fallacy around the appeal to authority. We've had it deeply conditioned into us that whoever is being held as a social authority is more right than you, no matter what you think, no matter what you feel. At least this is the attempted conditioning. We have more or less healthy or unhealthy ways to relate to that. But it seems like the overarching authority is the academic echelon, which oftentimes, as it becomes translated down into the general public, comes with this, like we said before, this physicalist narrative that translates down because it perfectly fits into I'm not against capitalism, but a capitalistic, materialistic, like I said, factory farm of humans, this paradigm that basically is a constant force to steal magic and meaning, to squash it out and replace it with physicalism, products, purchases, and acquisitions of material worth and material value, rather than re-enchanting a sense of magic and wonder in the world. And that, the old saying that you are the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. Well, the people that you spend the most time with, for the most part, are averages of their environment. Like you said before, we talked about the inner subjective narrative sort of creating the perception of reality as an ordered, structured thing, but then en masse this becomes culture. And we have a culture that I find just squashes the sense of meaning and value and magic in life and reduces it down. Reductionism being a strong thing too, be it social reductionism from the tribe to the nuclear family, or to the point where the kids then move out and it's just the adults and empty nest syndrome, or be it any form of different scientific reductionism, that things like Changa that really force a reinvestigation of what the nature of reality is, and like you said, re-enchant reality with this sense of magic, I think is incredibly important, because I believe it's that drab dissociation from the magic and wonder and beauty of life that leads people to generally having all sorts of shitty forms of suffering, sort of the mental diseases of civilization, of the dominator culture of colonialism. Like, these are the things that we are suffering, I believe, in a lot of ways, is because we've had the sense of meaning and value stolen from our lives. And I really appreciate that you captured this in your work, and that you're open, you're not now, but despite having been an academic, that oftentimes in academia it's frowned upon to say that you participate in the thing that you're researching, that you were very forward and open with how positive it was for your sense of self and your sense of your research, and I guess like the quality of your life to explore things like Changa, and I really thank you for being so open and honest with that.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. So, kind of like rounding out the interview, we've been talking about Changa in a really beautiful way. It really is quite a beautiful experience often, but it's not necessarily an easy experience, and it isn't necessarily a given that it's going to go really well, that there needs to be safety and caution and advice.
Yeah.
I believe even something that came out in the essay was that most people who have like a dedicated relationship to Changa are afraid of it to some degree, not because they're afraid it'll hurt them, but because that fear is a form of respect, because it's extremely powerful. Can you maybe offer us your advice on safety and various cautions that might be had? For example, it does contain MAOIs, which might have be contraindicative to certain foods and stuff.
Yes. So, as you said, like on a psychological level, like just to be safe, as every time you take psychedelics, you should like check out your setting. So you should check if you have in which state is your mind. So if you are like already alterated by other substances, should not be the case to use Changa, although if you are an experienced like psychonaut, you would be willing to do that. So for instance, as far as my experience and what I know about it is that like you could if you are experienced enough, you could actually use Changa in combination with LSD, and you could use it also in combination with ketamine, which actually makes the whole experience a lot more easy to navigate. But it's quite something for people that knows what we're talking about. But you should never do it with MDMA because it's can be very, very dangerous. It can bring you to death even. So you should never do this. You should you can't. It's better if you don't mix it with like other things like alcohol and, in my opinion, not even tobacco and marijuana, because it's just not. Well, everyone can do what it wants, and it's not dangerous to do it, but you should not do it if you want to really experience the spirit and the meaning of DMT. There are drugs that fit well together to make it easier to navigate, and these are, in my opinion, LSD and ketamine. For the others, it can just be another kind of experience, but never mix it with MDMA, that's for sure. And never mix it with antidepressive substances, because that could be very, very dangerous.
And would the same be said for amphetamines such as Ritalin, Adderall, or any form of speed that we can find, meth, etc.?
Yeah, I would not do that. Yeah, I would not mix with those kind of substances. And but for instance, it can be it can be okay to mix it with some sort of antidepressive that don't have interaction with MAO inhibitors. Like, for instance, one of the guy that I interviewed, he really needs to take benzodiazepine before smoking Changa, because, as we said, it's a scary experience. If you had traumatic experiences in the past with psychedelics, could help to be just more relaxed and and feel more comfortable and don't get in that state of fear, because it can be fearful. It can bring up experiences that you don't want to remember. It can bring it can show you words that in which you get completely lost. You may have the feeling that you're not able to come back, and all these things shall be shall be acknowledged, and a person just needs to get into the experience in a good setting, and with the knowledge that it's just gonna last 15 minutes, you're gonna come back, and whatever is coming into your world in that moment is just there for teaching you something. It's not just it's not there to scare you, and you can get a lot out of this. So just don't be afraid. Everything is gonna go away in 10 minutes.
Great. Yeah. I appreciate that with your cautionary advice came optimal stacking for optimal stacking of Changa. Georgia, thank you so much for being on the show and for writing this essay, which of course I'll link over in the show notes to this episode because I really enjoyed it. It's a fairly significant essay, and I just swallowed it up in 3 days. So really kudos to you for crafting, I think, this very important piece of work.
Thank you. Thanks a lot for interviewing me. Thanks.
Is there anything else that you'd like to leave the listeners with? For example, where they can find more about your work, or where they might be able to follow you on social media?
Well, yes. I guess just going to my, at the moment I just work on my academia page. All things are on my academia page. So you will link that to in my work. I don't have a website yet. I just try to be as anonymous as possible for now. And eventually in the future they will hear more about me if I come out with some other platforms where they can find me. But at the moment, it's just about looking for Giorgia Gaia in the web, and it's coming up me.
Okay, great. I'll make sure that links to your academia page are present on the show notes. So again, thank you very much, Giorgia, and I look forward to maybe seeing you around again one day.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, bye.
Ciao.
Thank you for listening to this episode of At Mind Radio. If you enjoyed it, one of the best things that you can do is tell a friend, either directly or over social media. Another amazing thing that you can do is to help this podcast grow by becoming a patron on Patreon or leaving me a one-time PayPal donation to help not only cover the cost of the show, but the ongoing investment of my time, energy, and economic resources into bettering the show, forwarding my career, and deepening my investment into this life path, my life work, of which the podcast is included. Thank you very much. Head to jameswjesso.com/support to look at all the ways that you can help the show progress and grow. You can also check me out on all the social media at jameswjesso. Until the next episode, take care.